this world?
That's a choice that Latin America has to make. If you go back a century, 1920s, read the Wall Street Journal, they were describing Brazil as the potential colossus of the South, comparable to the colossus of the North. Had huge resources, faced no real external dangers, politically sophisticated, educated populations, every reason for it to become, especially Brazil, but all of Latin America, another center of power in the world. It hasn't happened. In fact, the one time it really began to happen was during Lula's government, when, along with his very competent foreign secretaries, Cesar Amorim, the Lula government was able to turn Brazil into one of the significant actors in the world stage. It simply has not been sustainable.
Why?
In fact,
it's
very striking to see why. It's interesting, for example, to compare, say, East Asia with Latin America, say Brazil with South Korea. If you go back, say, to 1960, South Korea was at the level of a poor African country. Take a look, Brazil was much richer per capita. It's highly unequal in Brazil, but overall the average per capita income was much higher. The next 20 years, 1960 to 1980, both countries had a substantial growth rate, pretty comparable, and then it stops. South Korea continues to grow and develop, becomes a major industrial power. Brazil went through the famous 2 lost decades. By now, Brazilian per capita income is, I think, a quarter or half of South Korea's. And this is across the board, Latin America and East Asia. If you ask why, I think there has been good analysis of it. Latin America has never controlled its elites. The wealthy sectors basically have no responsibility to the country. They do what they want. They export capital, they import luxury goods. The East Asia is quite different. They're under control.
But why the left populism in Latin America did not work at the end? Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, even Bolivia. Why this end, melancholic end?
I don't think it's an end. I think it's
don't you think it's
a period of regression. But there are a lot of achievements which I think will remain. So take Brazil. Lots of things were wrong, but many things were good. So there was a sharp decrease in poverty, improvement in educational standards.
But they lost their power, and there is a regression now.
There's a regression, but I suspect it'll come back. I don't think this has happened over and over. The fundamental reason is the failure of Latin American societies to control the concentrations of wealth and capital and elite power, and to deal with the radical problem of inequality. I mean, the Latin American countries have ample resources. They're in a much better position to develop than East Asia. No enemies. However, the policies that have been pursued have been quite different. So in East Asia, for example, say South Korea, Taiwan, they followed the Japanese model. They welcomed investment, but it was targeted. It was used under careful planning for development. At the same time, Latin America was importing capital, but luxury goods, not capital goods, and not targeting them.
Do you think that corruption is the main problem in Latin America or not?
It's a problem, but a serious problem, but it's a problem everywhere.
Everywhere.
I mean,
even in Spain.
Even in the United States, it's dramatic. Depends what we call corruption. Like take Apple Computers, the biggest company in the world. They succeed in barely paying any taxes, but we don't call it corruption. What it amounts to is establishing an office in Ireland and saying that's the company, or putting about in the 1990s, just as an illustration, there was a period, you may recall, of great enthusiasm about emerging markets and how wonderful it was to invest in emerging markets, in Latin America in particular. So, out of curiosity, I subscribed to the Department of Commerce regular reports. They give detailed reports of every economic statistic you can imagine. And one of them is foreign direct investment in the Western Hemisphere, excluding Canada, which is part of Europe. And it was very interesting. Turned out about 25% of it went to Bermuda. 15% went to the British Caribbean islands. 10% went to Panama. That wasn't to build steel mills.
And it's corruption.
We don't call it corruption. And that's a huge amount of money.
One last question, Mr. Chomsky. After so many years, you are 88 years old, a young man. Do you think that the human species are getting better? That we are happier today than in the past?
Happier is hard to judge, but I think there have been advances. And so, for example, 50% of the world's population are women. There have been great advances in women's rights. The civil rights generally, there's been substantial improvement. There's now serious concern for the very significant threat of environmental catastrophe. 50 years ago, there was nothing. There's much more opposition, and take the United States, opposition to aggression is far higher than it was in the past. The United States could not possibly do something like the invasion of Indochina, the worst crime since the Second World War. That's out of the question. Lots of things to criticize, some of them pretty awful, but there's a general slow improvement with periods of regression.
You're an optimist, so.
The choices are to be an optimist and to do what you can to make things better, or to be a pessimist and ensure that the worst will happen.
Okay. Thank you very much.